Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us on today's deep dive on federal cybersecurity funding, a topic that is certainly top of the mind for state CIOs, state CISOs, and everyone here at NASCIO. My name is Matt Pincus. I'm the Director of Government Affairs at NASCIO, and I will be keying up today's panel. And we have two fantastic speakers. We have the legendary Dan Lorman, Chief Security Officer and Chief Strategist at Security Mentor, and Tony Pepper, CIO at Egress. Before turning over to these fine gentlemen, just a quick housekeeping items. This is a discussion. It should be interactive. If you want to have your cameras on, please feel free to do that. If you want to utilize the chat function, please feel free to do that. Make sure that if you are asking questions, you address it to everyone and not just the host. And this session is being recorded, so please be on your best behavior. With that, Dan, Tony, time is yours, gentlemen.
Thanks, Matt. So it's a pleasure to kind of be part of this session today, and I think the timing of the topic around this conversation is really, really interesting, and it's certainly something that's incredibly close to our hearts. Myself and Dan work incredibly closely with local and state government throughout the United States, and I think this particular topic was around how we could leverage the funding available, often as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, to be able to drive innovation throughout local and state government, and actually be able to access pots of funding that are available to really enable local and state government to be able to tackle probably, and it isn't limited to local and state, it's limited, it's every business on the planet has never ever anticipated that their entire workforce would be driven to their homes, and that more traditional ways of sharing content and connecting with people would be transformed overnight. And Dan, you know, I know it's something we talk about a lot, but you know, when this first happened, I remember we spoke on the phone, and we kind of said, you know, I don't think in history events have taken place whereby it's driven and forced change, and while there are some horrendous sort of really deep personal challenges that all of our families have probably experienced in some degree, I think what's also interesting is I don't think ever in our history have we seen something happen so fast that has then impacted every single organization on the planet in such a way that is taking what is the legacy, if you will, taking the traditional way of operating in a business or in government, and completely turned it on its head. And I think one of the things that I'm certainly aware of as working in a cybersecurity company is just the sheer risk now that every organization is under. That in some instances, Matt, they're new risks, and in other situations, they are risks that's always existed, but they've just been accelerated. So one of the things I'm particularly interested in first of all, getting Dan's feedback on this, but with the wider group, is this an opportunity to leverage funding if it's available, or leverage the difference in environment that we now find ourselves in to innovate and to drive change? Because I think some of these things, you know what, state and local have needed to do some of these things for decades. So is this the impetus that we need to really drive technology and advancement in our business? And actually, if there is funding available, can we use that funding to kind of spearhead that? Dan, I don't know whether you'd want to contribute there.
Yeah, just real quickly, because we want to hear from the questions from the audience, but absolutely, I think the answer is a great question, Tony. The answer is an absolute yes. I mean, when I think about it, the only thing I can even think parallels it is 9/11 and what happened. 9 months later, I was the first CISO in Michigan, and 3 years later, Michigan was in a 10-year recession. We had huge budget cuts. We did major reorgs. Terry Takai, many of you know Terry, ran things. We consolidated 40 data centers to 3 and then 2. We did lots of major overhauls because of the budget crisis, but we were also able to go after grant funding, and we got $6 million in cyber grant that first year, $2.5 million the second year. And those, that I'm talking now 15 years ago. And I agree with you, Tony. That was not even as significant as this, in a sense that that really hit the U.S., but maybe not other parts of the world as well. But it certainly impacted how we did things in Michigan. But I think the answer is an absolute yes. I think states have to rethink how they're doing everything that they're doing, bottom, top to bottom, bottom to top. And there is grant money, and you can do, and I think that's what we're here to talk about. You can do kind of lemons to lemonade. And the links that we have in the session, if you haven't had a chance to watch the session, I was going to walk through a bunch of those, but I'm not going to do that right now. There's some fantastic materials in there. Click on the links, examples, case studies, people who've been able to get funding, how-to list, tips, 10 tips for this, 3 tips for that. We can talk about those, but we certainly want to hear your questions.
So, Matt, I don't know if there are any or Dennis, was there any initial questions to kick us off, and then we'll just kind of see how we navigate through the session.
Well, I thought your comments made me think about the fact that I know Matt and I are seeing evidence that on a federal level that there's a greater interest in appetite for dealing with the cyber threats in states. But I've also noticed that in the state, sorry, there's somebody beeping in my driveway here, so I'm going to hold off my comments. I'll be right back on that. I'll let somebody else talk for a minute. Be right back.
Anyone else? Well, I'll ask you guys a couple questions. So, we know for everyone who watched the plenary session this morning on the cybersecurity study, we know that only about half the states have a dedicated budget for cyber. So I guess Tony and Dan, do you guys see that changing? Do you see that increasing as we move forward, or do you see the economic impact of COVID on the states preventing states from budgeting for cyber?
Tony, you want me to start on that?
Yeah, please do, and I'll chip in.
I mean, I think overall, it's a mixed picture. I mean, and I believe the case was made. We talked to Srini talked this morning about the session that 10 years ago, and the top 2 issues were staffing and resources. They're still staffing and resources. So I think there's always going to be the needs there. Some states, and I know NASIO has been advocating for centralized IT security for, like I said, better part of a decade, certainly the last 5 years for sure. The challenge being that some states just don't want to go there, some do. What I do believe is happening, I would, my views, Matt. I mean, I'm from Michigan. I was Michigan CSO. I'm a big believer in centralized IT security, just like Srini was advocating for, just like it was talked about at the plenary session this morning. So I think there'll be some movement there. I think some states won't go there. But what I do think will happen is this. This is, I'm going to make some bold statements here. What we're seeing right now with fraud in unemployment systems is unprecedented, in my opinion. I mean, it's just rocking the world. Now, I know everyone's talking about election security, talking about other things, but I mean, this is an area where there really could be, and people always say, is there real ROI with security, return on this investment? I think the answer is absolutely yes, because we're having tens of billions of dollars, and some people say it's hundreds of billions. I don't know. We'll find out over the next year in fraudulent applications. I don't think the bad guys are getting that kind of money, but there's a lot of money, and it's affecting citizen services. All the things we talked about, the CIOs talked about the other day about getting through via the phone, getting through via the web, talking to a live body. The wait lines are 3-4 hours, and they're not getting returned now in many states around the country. So what I'm saying is, I think this is a great example of where, had cybersecurity really been in those unemployment processes better up front, we would have seen a lot of ROI. And I believe we will, Matt, to answer your question, see federal dollars, state dollars in areas like unemployment fraud, because there's really, truly a huge opportunity to actually save money and do a better job and have a better customer service performance that Tony talked about in the session, all at the same time. Literally more for less and better service. And I think So I think that's one example. I think same thing's going to happen with elections. I think we'll be talking about elections 3 years from now. I mean, obviously we got a big one coming here in 3 weeks. But I mean, I think as you start going down the list of items, transportation, unemployment systems, elections, I think there really is an opportunity to do a lot more effectively. And so you're going to see dedicated budgets for those topics. Now, whether that all goes into a big pot that Maria Thompson can use at the top of North Carolina, remains to be seen. But I do think more dollars are coming for cybersecurity, yes.
It's interesting, Matt, because whenever I hear about dedicated pots for cybersecurity, well, I think that's a great thing, because I think there's never enough, to be able to bolster what organizations need. I think my concern is that I love the way Dan talked about security as opposed to cybersecurity per se, because what is cybersecurity anyway? And I think that's the challenge, really. I mean, ultimately, if we just slightly dumb that down and think of every single business process that we implement in local and state government, there is a security element to that needs to be considered. Yep. Then ultimately, if there's dedicated pots for cybersecurity, then that's great. But actually, there should be a security focus and certainly a consideration of what is it we're trying to do? Are we trying to implement a digital, take a physical process to a digital process? Then actually, we need to consider security as part of that, whether it is the absentee ballot that I spoke about with Dan and Solomon on our session, or whether it's I need to receive COVID-19 test results into local or state, and we need to do that digitally because we can't do it physically. And how do we do that securely? Because that's incredibly sensitive information. So I think my point there is every project that both state and local government will be implementing, which has a digital focus, should have a security consideration as part of that. And therefore, I think one of the quite right things that Solomon Adote mentioned from Delaware is that you have to partner up and think of what digital transformation programs that you want to implement, and how does security, or indeed cybersecurity, fit into those existing programs, rather than hoping for the magic cybersecurity budget to kind of turn up. And if it doesn't turn up, then guess what? We can't do anything under the banner of security. I think we've not got to think through that lens. I think we've got to look at what are we trying to build and trying to innovate so that we can connect with citizens and business partners, and how does security fit into that universe, and then fund it accordingly, whether it comes from a dedicated budget or whether it comes from a budget from other part of the business. I think partnering is key, really. That's certainly how I see it.
Great points. And I think, as we've moved into this virtual, remote, digital world we're going to be living in for the foreseeable future, the security aspect of that has never been more important. So let me get to a question, put it out there. And by the way, everyone who is in the GoTo meeting, please feel free, turn on your cameras, engage in the chat, and let's keep this conversation lively. So Rupert Ross, what federal funding has been dedicated to schools and education? Good question.
I mean, I think, there's, again, in the links, you can look at a wide list of items that were included, and I can go specific items here. I think we talked about this a little bit earlier before we started the session. I don't know that there's a line item for cybersecurity in the education budget, or if we're talking about cybersecurity funding dedicated to schools for cyber. I mean, certainly there are programs that NSA has for training. There are programs that Department of Education has for a curriculum and those kinds of things, but specifically related to grants funding for cybersecurity. I think there's a couple of things I would point out. There's some links that we mentioned in the session from the Department of Education, and there's a list of the CARES Act funding for U.S. Department of Education. And just like we were saying earlier, technology is part of that. So, obviously schools have been impacted by coronavirus. They've been impacted by the pandemic. They've had to do work from home. They've had, huge implications related to everything from testing and certainly health issues to technology issues. So those are listed. They're listed in the links. I mean, obviously I'm not going to try and, type them right here or something, But I mean, I could cut and paste it into this link here. You could look at it. I will do that right now, as a matter of fact. But I think, I know, Matt, you were in the session in Detroit for the International Cyber Summit, and you guys talked. I mean, do you know of a specific line item for cybersecurity? You know, I would think in general, it's funding dedicated to schools and education related to, you know, the CARES Act.
Yeah, and I think that's been, you know, and any of the CIOs on this panel can feel free to chime in here, but I think there's been a lot of confusion over the way that CARES Act funding was structured and interpreted by states and local officials. And honestly, what I've seen is that local governments have been more creative in using CARES Act funding on IT related needs. You know, CARES Act was really supposed to be the first coronavirus relief bill in a series of legislation passed. You know, this was passed, you know, 6 months ago now. So we're now in the middle of October, and you know, these IT needs and cyber needs are not going away. You know, the broadband funding in CARES has really been used to bolster schools, not just in terms of security, but in terms of connectivity. So that, you know, and I agree with everything that you guys have said, Tony and Dan. You know, that you don't necessarily need to have a siloed or a line item in a bill to allow you, you know, to access funding for cybersecurity or IT. But it would be a lot clearer, right? So we know that there is dedicated broadband funding, just like there's dedicated election security funding in the CARES Act, and that certainly makes it easier. And I think working with, you know, education officials who are getting that direct funding and saying, hey, you know, you may need to, you know, make your classroom expend, you know, X number of dollars to make your classroom safer for in-person learning. You should also be looking at, you know, how do you better secure your networks if you are going to be having, you know, remote learning or some sort of hybrid option. So it's been kind of a mixed bag. I think, you know, there really isn't a black and white example of how states and locals have utilized those funds. I'll go to Phil's question, which is a good one. So one challenge, especially with federal funding sources, is they are typically oriented towards the owner-operator model. CARES Act seems the same. Are any of these sources recognizing the move to ISS, PAS? Are there degrees of freedom, like instead of spending $100 this year, convert it to $20 a year over the next 5 years?
I mean, I could take a stab at that. I'm not aware of that kind of flexibility. Most people I'm talking to and the people I'm working with, you know, the CARES Act, you know, again, there are thoughts that might change and this might get extended, but that it kind of, you know, on New Year's Eve at when the ball drops in New York, the CARES funding goes away. So, you know, obviously that could change in a lame duck. They could extend the money. They often do. Matt, you've experienced this for many years. I know Doug's on the line now. He could probably jump into that. So, I mean, might that happen? Certainly Homeland Security grant funds, deadlines have been extended many, many times. But one of the big things that I'm hearing, as you mentioned, Matt, from locals is it is generally one-time money. It's generally it's dollars that have to be spent this year, at least right now, today, as we tape this, you know, by December 31st at midnight, and then, you know, I don't see a lot of, like, you know, creative payback over 5-year kind of stuff. So those are my simple answers, but I'm certainly willing and be happy to be proven wrong if somebody has some other facts that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, I think that the way that the CARES Act was structured is, you know, it does put that drop dead date on, you know, how to use those funds, and in a lot of cases, that creates irresponsible spending, right? Yep. You know, you get to November, December, and you say, oh crap, you know, we have to spend this, but we don't necessarily have a need, and we can't extend it. So, you know, that is not good. I see Doug is chiming in.
Well, other than just to reiterate Dan's point, I mean, there's not going to be, and to answer Phil's question, any multi-year funding. That's highly unusual in federal practice, unless it's strictly for physical infrastructure. They haven't done that in the cyberspace. And I think the other thing is, we all know from the State Homeland Security Grant Program on the SHISHCAP program that 80% of that goes to the local governments. And in any of the CARES money, the local governments have been more creative and innovative. And one of the reasons they can do that is because they don't have the, I would call the constrained and laborious procurement processes that the states have to entail. We've even seen, with some of the emergency acquisitions, states pretty much going right back to the elongated acquisition process for goods and services in the IT space. Already. They're not giving them much flexibility. Most of the folks that I talk to, and I've been on several other conferences, are not optimistic that there will be a major change or shift post-COVID, and there'll be some, and the procurement officials will embrace more of a streamlined acquisition process. It doesn't seem likely, and so it's often difficult for states to make those acquisitions, even with federal dollars available, because of the months and months it takes to make these things happen. So that's something we're going to be talking about more in the upcoming one sort of joint project on security and on procurement, and see if there's any way for us to come up with some more creative ideas and more flexible negotiations to do that for the states.
Yeah, and we just add one other thing to what Doug just said, and that is that I highlighted this in the session if you didn't get a chance to watch, but I think it's important that states and agencies have their lists ready to go. And there's a lot of talk about, will there be another round of stimulus? Talking about will it happen before the election? Will it happen after the election? How much will state and local governments get? Is it going to be 400 million? Is it going to be? And there's Democratic proposals and Trump proposals and House proposals and Senate proposals. And I don't know what's going to happen. I don't have a secret, magic wand to look at the future. But I think most people believe, and I'm watching Squawk Box this morning like many of you guys are, the financial news and the stock market. Most people believe there will be another stimulus package and state and local governments will be getting another round of stimulus. So, I mean, it would be another one-time money. Again, I'm not, because I'm predicting it will probably happen. And I don't know when, but sometime between now and next March, there's going to be another round of stimulus. So the key point is have your list ready to go. And I mean, I can verify this, vouch for this in 17 years of Michigan government, how many times it was like no money, no money, no money, no money, no money. Then you're late, that people would literally walk into my office and say, you got till Thursday to spend $1 million. I mean, that happened to me at least 15 times. So, have your justifications ready, have your projects ready, have all those things we talked about, have everything that Tony talked about with Solomon. Have all that ready to go. Have your case ready. Don't just say, well, I'm waiting to see when the pot of money, or, see if the House and Senate or the president signs stimulus package. That's probably a little bit late. I think there's plenty of work that can be done now, because I do think there'll probably be another round. And if there's, certainly your states may already have money right now you can go after. I think many states that's already happening, but there, likely will be another round. So the message I guess I'm trying to, relay is get ready now.
Hey, Dan, Gary Schwartz.
Gary, good to hear your voice. Yeah, I hear you. Thanks.
So I was asking Matt, it sounds like it's okay for me to say, Netscope, who I work for, is willing to run a free report. We partnered with the grants office, and if anyone on the line wants to email me directly, we'll provide a report as to what grants are available.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, I think just having the knowledge of what is out there is crucially important. I don't know if Dennis or Rupert want to chime in, but there's just so much confusion over, what grants are available. We work a lot with FFIS, but that is, they're a service that are really only available to state government, so state and local government. So, trying to navigate just how many programs are out there and what you can leverage is certainly a big challenge. So I think the links that you provided, Dan, were really helpful. Any other questions, comments? Dennis, I know you were going to say something and then you had to jump. Always insightful.
He was having an Amazon delivery, I think. Maybe he's still doing that.
And Matt, I have a question.
Oh, hey, Tom.
This is Tom Ryder at Telos. I would love to, have you guys walk me in from the ledge here and assure me. I'm at a sort of crossroads of, do I invest in my team to support this state and local mission for cybersecurity? And I see it's important and I want to do it, but I feel like the CARES Act is going to, raise cybersecurity as the rising tide raises all ships. But if it's not spelled out, only the real tactical things are going to get funded. Like the CISO from Washington State talked about the crazy number of fraudulent attempts on their unemployment, and they put a web application firewall in place, and that seemed to solve the problem. So that things like that are going to get funded, or the service edge stuff that can help remote workers, that's going to get funded. But centralized policy management automation, that and it seems like the states are going to be broke for a long time, bouncing back from the hemorrhaging they've had to do. So, can anybody give me confidence that investment now is a wise move?
Tony, you want to give it a shot first? I mean, I have certainly some points I can bring up as well.
Yeah, so I mean, it is. I think the reality is, I think we all, it's probably one of the most uncertain times in history, really, isn't it? And I think that, and not just in local and state government, just around the globe. Ultimately, I see enormous amount of uncertainty in Europe and across the United States, and I think it's very difficult ultimately with that lack of certainty to be able to invest with confidence, really. That said, I think the reality is our organizations are probably more at risk than they've ever been. And I think that, and the challenge that I see, certainly, and I don't see this changing anytime soon, is I think remote working has changed indefinitely now. And I've kind of fallen in, there's been two camps on remote working for years, actually. There's one that's been, hey, people have got short memories, and in 2 years' time, people will look back on this and say, wasn't that crazy when we were all working from home? But now we're all back to work 5 days a week. And there's the others that say it's changed forever and there ain't no going back. And I think, and I'm in that camp now that believes that the underlying culture of business and the underlying way of doing business with business partners, citizens, and the way in which we engage with employees has changed indefinitely now. Now, okay, some people will come back to work 4 or 5 days a week, but I think whereas before maybe it was 5% and 10%, maybe on top end 10% of employees worked remotely at any one time, I think we're now seeing across the United States and across continental Europe, it's more like 50% or 60% long term will have some degree of remote working. And that just completely changes the underlying operating model of security. And it changes our boundaries, just like cloud and mobility had a fundamental shift to how we thought about security and technology. I think now remote working and the risk that brings. I mean, it's, again, so, the door going and Dennis having to get the Amazon guy, that levels of distraction, that's just normal now, and the kids banging on the door, the dog barking, I just think distractions, human error, risks are different like they were a long time ago. And I just feel that investment ahead of the curve and lowering those risks is ultimately a great position to be in, because it certainly in our research and all of the customer engagement that we see, it's just not changing anytime soon. This is now a new way of operating. I don't know whether you'd agree with that, Dan.
100% agree. 100% agree, Tony. I'll be real quick. I know we got 1 minute left. I would just say there was an ad out, and it's getting a lot of funny play in the UK, actually, Tony. You saw that they were telling all the ballerinas to get into cybersecurity, and I know it was getting a lot of pushback, and then even the Prime Minister's office in the UK said, that's probably overkill. But I mean, I just think digital transformation is changing the way everything is being done, and where we're signing documents, the way we're doing everything in government. And I do not see cybersecurity. I mean, I've heard one was one report, from, United States and Asia and then Europe, was going to be 40% growth in certain cybersecurity industries. Now it's going to be 30% or 25%. But I mean, no one's saying it's not going to be growth. And so to me, I just don't see how digital government digital transformation can happen without huge investments in cybersecurity. And I don't think those examples you gave, Tom, were a couple for unemployments and for other areas, but elections, unemployment, I mean, that's just the beginning. I think everything in government is going digital transformation. And I think I'm a believer for the next decade, this ain't going away. That's my view.
A good note to end on. Dan, Tony, thanks for moderating a great session. Dennis, hope you were able to square away the commotion outside.
No, it went from that to a call from the governor's office. So,
all right, that's important.
I want to thank you all for what I'm sure was a great session and all of what you're doing and being partners with NASCIO and all of the states. It's great to have you guys around. Thank you very much. Well,
we're doing it again in a half hour. So, and this session will be on demand within 24 hours. And thank you all for your participation, attendance, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Matt.